to record. So I'd like to start by opening the floor to any questions. I have got a list of questions if everyone's too shy to ask anything, but if anyone would like to ask a question, I'm here for whatever you want to ask, but I sort of thought maybe give us a little bit of your publishing history and background and how you started.
Well, I can tell you that it was never the plan to have 3 names. That, right off the bat, before we even built it with the pen name thing, I can tell you that was never part of the plan. Although, as some other authors have said along the way, who could plan this career? Who could plan a writing career? It's constantly changing for all of us, as we all know. But I will say that the plus side of the 3 names is that it allows me to signal to readers which world of mine they're going to enter, the historical, the contemporary, the futuristic, which seems like a good idea. The downside is that any author who goes this route is going to end up having to build a different audience. I do not recommend it in this day and age. If you're making that decision in your career, my advice is stick with 1 name, because you just cannot build multiple names anymore. It was hard enough to do back before social media. Now I think it's almost, it's just a bad way to go. However, that said, the reason I ended up with 3 names was because I managed to kill off various careers along the way. So, and when I had to reinvent myself, which I think if you survive long enough in this business, everybody's going to have and that bad sales baggage attached to it. It was starting from scratch. So that's the upside and the downside of the name thing. One of the things I learned along the way that I will pass on to you for what it's worth is that the way I survived enough to change out, move from 1 name to another, was because at some point, and I remember exactly when, I found my core story. And for what it's worth, I will tell you that is probably the most valuable lesson, the most valuable takeaway I can give you is to have an understanding of your core story, because once you know your core story, you'll be...
Can I just stop you for a minute? Sorry, I'm interrupting because someone has got their microphone on their computer and it's really causing a few problems. So if you're webbing in, can you actually turn your microphone and your computer off? Because otherwise it's going to distort what we're hearing and what Jayne's trying to say. Thanks.
Where was it? Oh, yeah, core story. That's an author, just can't track more than 5 minutes. Okay, so the core story, I discovered this the hard way because I managed to kill off my Jayne Krentz name the first time several years ago with a series of futuristic romances. You're all too young to remember this. Shields Lady, Crystal Flame, Sweet Starfire, right? Okay. That was back in the days when I thought, what's wrong with putting the romance in the future, right? Well, what's wrong is that a lot of people don't want to read that science fiction setting. So at that point, when I realized I had killed off the career and nobody wanted to buy another book from me, and I realized I was going to have to reinvent myself. This is the first major reinvention I went through. I looked at the story I had written in those 3 books, and I realized that I took away the psychic animals and I took away the fancy futuristic settings on everything else, that what I had left was essentially a marriage of convenience story, which is fundamentally 2 people who have to learn to work together in order to survive. They have to learn to trust each other. They will fall in love, but they have to learn to trust and depend on each other in order to survive whatever danger they're facing. And I thought, well, dang, there's a place for that. It's the historical market. Marriages of convenience are a staple of that genre. But I will admit that at the time I had never read historicals, except for a few. I had read the early Georgette Hare. That was all I knew about the historical market. So at that point, that was my first understanding that I actually had a core story, and that probably what I didn't realize and what I do now is that I was going to be exploring that core story the whole of my career. That's what writers do, I think. They find the issues, conflicts, the various emotional things that they like to study, they like to explore. That's your core story.
Sorry, Darren, it's your microphone that's on and we're hearing everything you're doing, even if you're off camera. So can you turn your microphone off?
I thought I had.
No, because we can hear you. You shouldn't be able to talk to me. Let me see if I can do it for you.
It's off now.
Down the bottom, it's got mute my audio.
Okay.
It's mature market. People will use it for some purposes. A lot of people I meet now are buying multiple copies. They'll buy one for the digital reader and then they'll buy one. Yeah, I'll do that. They're hardcover.
One to carry with you.
Yeah. That anyone will ever fully prevail because of the competition. But I think the book will always.
Yes.
I'll just have to sit there and still.
About having the 3 separate names. What happens and how you've separated them out. If you have a separate newsletter list because you don't get crossover, if you have a separate newsletter list for each.
All I can say is if you just I communicated the fact that I was under a new name. And there was no way to do that. Really. It was the back of the book, maybe. You know, but in those days it was all coming out of New York and there was just be a little off the bio. Sometimes it would say also writes as or this was my name. But nobody reads those. I'm here to tell you, nobody reads the author bios.
I don't know how many times I've been
in a signing event, and a third of the people would go through the lines like, "Oh, I didn't know you wrote his Jayne. I didn't know you wrote his Jayne." So people do not read author bios, or if they do, they don't remember.
I remember reading you as Stephanie James in Desire and Jayne and Krentz in Temptation, not knowing that they were the same person, but on my bookshelf.
That's been the story of my life, actually. My story of my writing life. That's why I say, don't go there, people, don't go there. Stick with it, stick with it.
So does each voice have a different wardrobe?
A different wardrobe, yeah, the same grubbies, same sweatshirt, same sweatpants, yeah.
Can you tell us something about your writing process?
My writing.
Just unmute that mic and I'll hear you.
Oh, lovely.
See the lights are green?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Perfect.
It was easy.
So are you a pantser or a
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, all sorted. Sorry about that, guys.
Technology. Oh, the pantser.
Yes.
Yeah. So I start out with a sort of outline, a sort of proposal. As Nalini and I both know, our editor does like something in writing. However, she's also very understanding when we go off script. Not all editors are, so that's we lucked out there. But so I start off with a general sort of vision of the book. But my problem is that I know myself well enough now to know that I will not get my best ideas until I'm actually in the writing mode. It's not up front where it would be very useful to be able to chart it all out. And my mind doesn't work that way. So I might start with and I usually do know going in where the first 3 chapters are headed. I've got that initial scene set up. And I'll have some vague ideas of where the rest of the book is. But the bottom line is I'm going to get the ideas that excite me once I start writing. And I think it's because we get in, for most of us, we're in 2 different modes. Outlining is one mode and creating is another mode. And it's two different processes, at least for me. So is that true for most of you? I mean, does anybody? Yeah.
I never know what's going to happen until I get there.
Yeah. And it's scary in a way. I mean, it's unnerving because you get up every morning and you're not real sure where you're going that day.
I know the beginning, I know the end, and then I have find my way to the end.
Yeah. I think
things can change.
So how many hours would your morning write be? On average?
7 to around noonish, but it's not solid writing because there's phone calls, there's there's email. I think of in terms of writing scene to scene. Once I'm in a scene, I want to finish the scene, and I'll stay there however long it takes to muddle through or get to the end, figure out what that scene is. And I think the thing that I've learned about writing is that if you think about the whole book, you're almost dooming yourself before you start because it's so overwhelming. But I think scene to scene, and each scene is like a little story, a little tiny short story for me, and it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. So I write scene to scene.
And if you feel you've got some writer's block, is that something?
Writer's
have
block.
you got any good advice for that? So I've got it.
Okay, I'm not, everybody interprets that phrase differently. So I don't want to make a blanket statement, but I will say if you think you've got writer's block, ask yourself if what you really got is writer's boredom. You're bored with that character, you're bored with that scene, you can't think of anything else to do, so you're bored with it.
Yeah.
Seriously, I think that's, for most of us, that's probably what's really going on. And what that should tell us is, okay, this isn't working.
Okay.
I better start over.
Yeah.
I need to get excited again. Then the second piece of advice I can offer, which I learned from, I think I was sort of doing it intuitively, but I didn't verbalize it until a friend of mine verbalized it, Kathy Linz, who is sadly no longer with us. But her advice was start interviewing your characters on the page. Start a dialogue with them, just you and them, or put two of them together, two characters together. Let them start talking about what their problems are, and stuff will come out of the blue. Yeah, that's it. That's all I've really got. But I do think that for most of us, the fundamental problem is boredom, you're not excited enough about where you're going to want to get there.
How do you keep your being so prolific and have a core story?
Conscious of doing with the characters. Fundamentally, I write archetypes. We all know what a hero and a heroine are supposed to do when crunch time comes, right? They will do the right thing. They're going to have a sense of honor. They're going to have a sense of courage. They're going to have a sense of, they're going to have determination. They're going to have some optimism about the future, that make mentally honorable people. That's what popular fiction is all about, the stories are our morality plays, if you will. They remind us what being a hero and a heroine really are supposed to be and what they're supposed to do. And we all, like I said, we know going in that they will do the right thing. That's just infused into, I think, if you're successful in popular fiction, my guess is you're doing characters who are fundamentally, your hero and heroines are going to be fundamentally honorable, decent, do the right thing people when the chips are down, even if it means sacrificing their own happiness, their lives, because that's what a hero does, hero or heroine does. So from that standpoint, that's the archetype is always there and it's always fresh because it's the heroic archetype. What I do for my own amusement and for the readers is I change up the characters' past, whatever trauma they've experienced, because let's face it, the only interesting characters are those who have been through some kind of trauma and have to overcome it in order to do the right thing, right? And so that's where the actual thinking about what I'm going to do with a character comes into it. And when you've written as many books as I have, you are looking for new backgrounds and new traumas, new situations. The other thing to keep in mind, I just time to bring it up, is the one thing I think we've all discovered in the past few years is that readers love series. They love connected books. They like each book to be a standalone. They want to be able to beginning and there, but they like returning to familiar worlds. And this goes back to Sherlock Holmes, and I mean, there's nothing new under the sun here. This is people. Remember the classic story of Conan Doyle supposedly tried to kill off Sherlock Holmes, and then the public got so upset that resurrect him. That's an old lesson, and one we can all benefit from. And in the romance market, it's a question of, we need a new couple each time because we've told the other couple's story. There's nothing, for most of us, that's a done deal. So we need a new couple, but I think readers do love, as we know, they love that connected, the feeling that they've been there before. Now, the suspense in the mystery market discovered this long before we did. That's why there's so many continuing characters in the mystery market, in mystery fiction. But for romance, it is a little more complicated because you are trying to introduce a new couple each time. And the only advice I can give on that is don't tie yourself down with so many rules for that world the first few books that you can't open it up. I kind of ran into that problem with the Jayne Castle world. I didn't expect that series to last as long as it did. So I had to get out of the underground tunnels. So all I would say is don't write yourself into a corner with the rules when you're going into it. Yeah. Nalini can speak to that better than I can. What would you tell us about world building when you've got a long running series going on?
Okay, I have to have like this. I'm having this huge fangirl moment over here. No, honestly, I just love everything you do. So I'm just like, I can't tell you anything.
Well, she's the expert on exotic worlds, and it's a craft you build over time, isn't it? It's not instant.
I think what I like, because I read across your genres, but the Jayne Castle books were kind of where I really was like the obsessive super fan. And then I spread out to all your other
good.
But, what I like is that you have that concept of the lost world, but then it's wide enough to spread out to other worlds.
Yeah.
Like you weren't on just one world. You have another world, and so I think that's really good if you leave yourself a little opening, to sort of expand.
Yeah, that's from both of us. I think that's the best advice. Is just don't. You want a series concept, and a great series can run forever, and you just want to leave yourself some wiggle room for writing. Yeah.
Coming back to writing scenes, how do you handle your research? At which point do you think about it? Do you do some before? Do you check it out after?
I actually kind of went through this for the first time in a long time, in a major way, with this most recent Amanda Quick title, The Girl Who Knew Too Much, because it was moving Amanda Quick into the 20th century. And I was really nervous about that because I had been burned on the futuristics years ago, and I'd never forgot that lesson. So moving Amanda Quick out of the 19th century, which is anybody who writes the historical knows, is now broadly defined on one end by the Regency and on the other end by the late Victorian, and the readers don't seem to have a problem moving back and forth. But move them either side of that century, and you run into other kinds of reader resistance. So when I decided I wanted to move Amanda Quick into 1930s California, with the kind of glamour Hollywood overlay there, this was a major conversation that I had with Cindy, the editor that Nalini and I share, Cindy Wong at Berkeley. And Nalini, I will be forever grateful to her because she just said, go for it. She said, we'll take the risk, you take the risk, and we're going to go for it. An editor like that, not every editor would do that. We know that, right? So I will be always very grateful for that. And it worked. But I think we had two things going in, which my editor was probably more aware of than I actually was until I got into it. The first is that it's not an unfamiliar world. Everybody kind of has an image of 1930s Hollywood because sooner or later we've all seen at least some of the films. We know names like Cary Grant, they're just, it's part of it, it's not unfamiliar. We have a sense of the history of that world, but it's far enough back now that we can fantasize about it, which is another key. If it's too close in time, it's history. Writers put it around 75 years. 75 years in the past, and all of a sudden you're into the fantasy version of the history. So the 30s is into that era now, and maybe that's what saved it. Maybe I owe it to Downton Abbey. People got familiar with the 1920s and kind of moving forward, and so they were ready to take the next step. I give Miss Fisher Mysteries full credit too, because although technically it's 20s, it sort of opened up the 20th century in terms of people being comfortable with that world. I knew enough, and this is stuff I had absorbed just from doing Regencies and Victorian stuff. I knew enough going in, and my mom told me that years ago. She said, I read the books for the glamour. you don't read it for the real world of 19th century London. You know, you read it for the fantasy element. And in the US at that time, with a lot of the country mired in the Great Depression and everything, the Los Angeles, Hollywood area was kind of a little golden globe, or a little golden spot, you know, in the country. And it was all run on glamour, and it was all run on the film industry, and that influenced everything. And there's a lot of money sloshing around. So, and there were lots of other things going on. The Prohibition, that was the liquor law that, I don't know if you, Prohibition was over, so the mob was looking for a new business model, and so they're players in the 30s because they were getting into gambling in a big way. The movie industry was huge. The power brokers in the movie industry, they ran LA. They ran Los Angeles. I mean, they were the power brokers. In places like Santa Barbara, California, were these wealthy playgrounds for the stars and the socialites and things. So anyhow, there was enough glamour going on, but enough dark stuff under the surface at the same time in terms of the mob, and the war was on the horizon, and everybody knew it. So it was always there in the news, you know, what's going on in Europe and that. So it wasn't like people were oblivious of it. So you asked about research. Okay, so what I did was, first of all, I watched a lot of those old movies, and I picked up so many things about the language. I was afraid to use some of the language because it sounded to my ears too modern, but then you hear the actors saying the words, you know, the language they're using. Okay, back in the 30s, you know, even though my Oxford English Dictionary says it didn't occur until 1940 something. I'm sorry, but it's there in that 1937 film, you know. I may not use it because it still might strike the ear as too modern to the reader, even because they'll make the same assumption I did. But the bottom line is you can pick up a lot of the language. Little things like they didn't have motels; they had auto courts. You know, little things like that it's all there in the language in the movie. So that was fun. Little things like, could you take a phone call out by the pool at the Beverly Hills Hotel? You know, yes, there's a film in which somebody's taking a phone call out by the pool. You know, you plug it in. That's how you did it. So stuff like that. I was able to cheat with the films and get a lot of good stuff out of it. I also have always had a certain interest in the history of science. So I kind of look for those things when I'm doing research. And what came up for me in the 1930s world was, because the war was on the horizon, all the major countries were trying to develop radar in a way that would be useful at sea. And that was like the big secret, top secret technology that was being explored by every major country. And the UK was actually ahead of it, ahead of the rest of the world on it. They had the technology. They defeated the last problems, so I won't bore you with all the detail. But the bottom line is, US was second. And at this point, the UK has the technology, but it doesn't have the manufacturing capacity because war is right on its doorstep. So Winston Churchill and President Roosevelt got together, and Churchill sent the technology over to the US, and the first small radars machines were built in a secret campus on the MIT campus, a secret, and stuff like that, you know, gives you, I mean, and there are people, historians today who say the real difference in World War II was made because of radar.
Yeah, but also forming allies.
Yeah.
Trusting one another.
Well, and it shows that long before the US was actually in the war, we were already pretty closely bonded with the UK and the Allies.
So things like that would give you a really good little push into the story.
So they give me the little nugget for the plot. They give me that little plot outline. So
so do you research as you go, as you're writing, or do you immerse yourself in research?
Yeah, the big secret on research is don't try to overwhelm yourself with it.
Or you just get lost in the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Once you've got your ideas and you've got a plot point, as you go along, you're going to know when you need to stop and do some in detail fact checking and stuff like that. Yeah. So I would say don't overwhelm yourself with the research ahead of time. But we all, I think, kind of have learned. We're all pros. We've done that. We know that lesson. But that's probably the biggest mistake beginners might make, is especially going into a new era. It's like, oh my God, how am I going to learn about everything about the 19th century? You know, and you don't really have to do that. So.
Yeah. Have you? So I know you did one romance where you had the same couple in 2 books, and that was a Gift of Gold.
Gift of Fire, yeah. Gift of Gold, yeah.
Have you, like, you write a lot of standalones? So how do you resist the temptation to go back to characters, you know, and write some more about it?
Yeah, Gift of Gold, Gift of Fire was kind of set up in my mind ahead of time, so I knew it. I could get a sequel going there, but most of the time I don't do that. I do a new couple every time. I might give a cameo, like you know how that we all know how that works. A cameo for the couple that was in the other book. But when I write a book, I want a new story. I want a new problems, new issues and stuff. So, and that's so it's mostly for me. What's that?
I said we'd be quite happy if Nalini do some more.
Yeah.
Characters.
Well, that's the thing I'm like there with Jayne. So I'm like, I would like to see some more.
Yeah. What happens to them? Yeah.
Well,
for a list. No?
Part of my problem is that once the story's done, I'm done with it. I mean, story's told. I want the new one. So I'm doing this more for myself maybe than for anybody else. And I think we all have to write first for ourselves. If we're not excited, like I said, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for the reader. You can go through the motions maybe, but you won't. There'll be no excitement on the page. So that's why I say I go back to that whole thing about, is writer's block really just, I'm bored with this story. I need another story. And don't fight that, because it's your intuition telling you something there. Yeah.
This might have been asked because I was so busy playing around. But do you have an like I don't know what you call it, like a writing calendar? Like you've got 3 genres. How do you fit so many different genres in a year that keeps your friend, you know, your readers happy? How does that work?
You know, from the beginning of my career to now, which is some time now, my writing pace hasn't changed all that much. And most of the people I know, their pace is their pace. It is whatever it is. It may be fast, it may be slow, but it's not a lot you can do about it. It's kind of part of your nature, I think. So my pace is about 4 months on a book. I think if it lasts any longer than that, I would lose my way. Even if I took all the contracts out of the picture and just said I can take forever to write this book, I'm not going to do that, because I'll lose interest if I peter it out too much. It's just not how I work. But I've got a friend who takes a year. That's it. She cannot put it any slower, any faster. I've got other friends who just 2-3 months, and that's it. But that's not something they deliberately choose.
And is that to do the first draft, or is that first draft second draft, third draft?
Yeah, that's pretty much the whole thing. By the time I start, and 4 months later, I'm going to be sending it in to my editor. It is what it is. I can't change it.
So do you decide to do like 2 historicals, 1 Jayne and Krentz, or do you do 1 of each genre?
Yeah, I write them in the sequence that basically the contracts govern it. So right now on the ship, I'm writing because it's just the time frame. They're all scheduled out, you know, for when the due dates are and everything. So yeah, and that lets me rotate through them. I put the Jayne Castle books on hold for a while this past year because I was getting up to speed with the new Amanda Quick world, and I wanted more time for that, and also this cruise. So I didn't want to be under the gun for it. So
are you shutting yourself in your room to write, or are you writing a deck?
Yeah, no. They just turned on all the Christmas music on the deck. Funny. Yeah, that time of year. But I write in the room. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, can I ask something about your mysteries? So do you, because your characters are so strong, do you start with the characters, or do you start with like the mystery plot when you do the mystery?
Well, that's a tough one because they grow together. The problems in the characters' lives determine where the mystery is going to go, and vice versa. For example, the book I'm writing now is is the third book in what is a little trilogy under my Jayne and Krentz name. The first one was When All the Girls Are Gone. The next one is out January. Is Promise Not to Tell. And I'm writing the third book, which is basically the third foster son's story. There's 3 foster brothers, and they each have their story. But that plot outline was all based on the fact that these people who are now adults spend some time in a cult. And so it's the evil part of that cult coming down 22 years later that is influencing the plots. And I realized going in, I really couldn't, I needed the evil cult leader to still be alive to give it a big story arc. And yet I need a story. Each of the 3 books needs a plot that both advances the story arc, but ties it up for the person who just wants the one read. And it's going to be a year before the next one comes out. So they need that satisfaction. So beyond that, the cult thing is, I just keep digging back into that world to find the next story, to find the plot. So barring a cult, I would say look for the and if you're trying to set up a series, just keep that in mind. Look for something that you can return to for plot material, and that'll give a coherence to the whole series, you know, that from now on. And the other way to build a series is just around a world. The community books that we're these long-running series like Eternity Springs and stuff like that, where you have this community and then bring newcomers into the community, and then they bring a new vibe in and a new plot outline in, and that's a good way to do the world building too. Very open-ended.
I've got a couple of questions that were sent to me from some of the girls that couldn't come, so I thought I'd better get some of those in because I'm looking at the time. Okay. One girl wants to know, in your experience, what are readers looking for in paranormal suspense?
Oh, paranormal. Nalini can probably speak to that better than I can, because I've kind of left it. I'm more into the Amanda Quick thing now. I don't know, but I do know, I've talked to Cindy, our editor, about it, and she said it's not like New York knows either. They'll know it when they see it, and it will be some author who turns it in, and that will be the next new thing, but nobody could predict it. Do you have any thoughts on it? Anybody else writing paranormal?
I think you're right, and I also think just in general with paranormal, you never know what's gonna hit until it hits. Yeah. And then everyone's like, "Oh, why didn't I do that?"
Yeah. Why didn't I think of vampires? I know. Yeah. No, it's and that's, most editors will tell you they don't invent the new genres. They get them over their desk, and it hits their desk, and they realize that something exciting is happening. So, yeah, I wish I had an answer. If I do, I'd write it. I'd say go for it. Find a new slant, because my theory on genres is that they don't change. They just get reinvented with each generation. So if you've got an idea, go for it.
If you were gazing into a crystal ball, what would be your predictions for the romance market over the next couple of years?
Well, it ain't going away. This is a passionate readership. These people read a lot of books, as we all know, and they're like us. They love that core story, those core stories, and this has always been one of the biggest markets in fiction, and it's not going away. I think it'll probably just keep getting refreshed and reinvented by new authors coming in. So.
And then, and sort of in line with that, is the pulling power of a big name still enough? Is competition affecting the top authors?
It's competition. I don't know any successful authors who really think in terms of competition, because this has never been a zero-sum game. If your book works and Nora Roberts works too, you're both going to get published. It's not like one of you does and the other one doesn't. So it's not that kind of a competition. It's not a business where only one person gets. It's up to you to build the audience. It's up to you to find your market. But readers are always looking for a fresh new voice. So I don't think it's an issue, really. and not among the pros, not among people. Maybe at the beginning when you're looking at all the people who've been published ahead of you, maybe you get nervous about it. But I think once you've been published, you realize it's not a zero-sum game.
And then we do notice that you dedicate every single book to Frank.
Oh, most of them, yeah.
And we thought we just wanted to make that we thought that was really lovely.
Oh, Frank was my husband. Yeah, he was out walking around Auckland today.
And then the other one was, do you yourself have a favourite romance genre that you read for fun?
Who I read for fun? Besides Nalini.
I'll see you later.
Okay. I like Christina Dodd. I like Susan Elizabeth Phillips. I'm enjoying Deanna Rayburn's new Veronica Speedwell series, which I think is kind of not the tip, because I think there's about a half a dozen authors out there now who are reinventing, I don't want to say the Gothic novel, because that puts it back into that gives it an old school taste, right? But this is some kind of, Sherry Thomas is doing them too. This is some kind of cross between Sherlock Holmes and Miss Fisher Mysteries. It's got a historical setting. These are historical settings, but it's the Lady Sleuth, and the continuing series with the Lady Sleuth. Like Sherry Thomas is doing one with a female Sherlock, basically saying that Sherlock Holmes was secretly a woman, but she had to use a man's name. There's Victoria Thompson has one coming out called City of Lies, which is the first in her Counterfeit Lady series. A woman who's apparently, managed to fake it as a lady in Victorian London, and all the problems she's going to run into. But there's always a crime. There's always a lady sleuth and the lady who solves the crime, and there's always a romance on the side. There's always a male character there. So it's not like it's more like Miss Fisher and less like Murder, She Wrote, if you see what I mean. Yeah, okay. So there is the romance, and it seems to be taking a strong, 1920s is about the end of it. That's mostly going to be, I think, 19th century, and it's going to have that overlay of the historical setting. And I just think those books are going to be hot. I can just feel it kind of coming on. There's not a real name for them. When I did something on my Facebook page saying, "Are you reading this? What do you call it?" And there's not a real, the name thing is kind of still happening. Like for a while, it took us quite a while to come up with the name paranormal. And nobody knew what to call the vampire and werewolf and psychic books that were coming out. And then somebody came up with the name paranormal. So for want of a better name, most of the readers on my page said they thought of it as historical romantic suspense. But publishing doesn't like that, because these books are being marketed to traditional suspense and mystery readers, and they don't want to think they're reading a romance. So marketing wise, that's not going to fly. I'm calling it the Lady Sleuth of the historical mystery, but that's an unwieldy name. So anyhow, I think we're seeing the rise of a new blip in that genre that I think will have a strong appeal to both the suspense readers and to those of us who are romance and romantic suspense readers. So I think we're seeing, these things happen, and you look back and you can sort of see it, but you don't always see it at the time.
And then lastly, unless anyone else has got a question.
When a light pop out of my head.
What is the best advice you've been given that you'd like to pass on to us?
The best advice I've been given that I'd like to pass on. Oh my gosh. Don't give up. I mean, this is a very entrepreneurial business, and nobody can write the books except you. And in the end, these days, nobody can really market the books except you. You're going to be stuck with all ends of the business. And I think it just behooves us to understand, realistically what that's going to demand going in. So
do you spend a lot of time on Facebook? Because you've mentioned Facebook a
yeah,
couple of times when we were downstairs.
Nobody can do everything, and I've sort of settled on Facebook. If that goes south, I'll find something else. But one way or another, you sort of need a platform these days. It used to be the websites. But now the websites are more like libraries. You go there if you're really interested in the writer and you want to see all the backlist or something like that. But it's not where you go for kind of current information so much anymore. You're usually going to, because people are just moving so quickly through social media. And researching through a website is a big deal. I mean, you've got, they're just bulky things right now. So, and I would also say that there is, to this day, there is no substitute for my old school mailing list. I do it with email, it's a newsletter mailing, email newsletter, but I will still see more. I am still able to reach my core market better with that old-fashioned newsletter than Facebook or Twitter or any of the other platforms. There's just no, it's old school, but it's,
and how often would you do?
A lot of people send them out regularly, but I don't. I just send them out when I've got something to say. But I do spend time on Facebook and other places trying to build it, trying to remind people that this newsletter does exist and they can sign up for it. But I will still see more direct sales off that newsletter than anything else. And that's where our core market is. They're the people who love you enough to sign up for the newsletter. So yeah.
You're going to open an email from you.
Yeah. So, anything else? Thank you so much for coming out.
So they actually all have the one per here, and the few that were dialing in all have a copy of your new book, and they get it first in the country, which will probably come to you.
Yeah, we've got something quite like them signed, haven't we?
Probably not the most practical thing to do as you go back on the boat. Maybe Tanya might want to say,
just thought they were so lovely.
Thank you so much.
And then just a little something to remind you of New Zealand in your trip, since you're only here for the day.
Thank you. Thank you. Open it now.
My sister came in. Oh my goodness. It's gorgeous. I will treasure the friendship.
I will treasure this. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for coming. Not very much. No, we didn't. Yeah.